Hi, this is Ken from the Word Bible Software Community and the Freeplane Mind Mapping Community. In a previous video, I gave a brief tutorial on using this site, productivity501.com, and how to memorize verbatim text. The link to that will be below. And this is where we left off. This is the first paragraph of the Gettysburg Address, and we've converted it to initials. And this on its own is very useful, but I've over the years developed 3 tweaks that have helped me to use this even better. One is to structure the text. Another one is to replace some of the initials with symbols. And the third one is to make sure you're using the correct font. Now, some of these tweaks may initially look a little bit complex or unnecessary, and you don't really need them to learn to memorize text. This tool is a great thing to use to memorize text just on its own. But I found with just a little bit of investment, these tweaks helped me a lot. So the first is structuring, and it's just a way of breaking apart or chunking the text so that it's not just in this block. So I'm going to start 407 years ago, and I'm going to click right there, and I'm going to press enter. And then our fathers brought forth on this continent. And this is very subjective. A new nation. If you see other ways to do it, that's fine. To some degree, I just follow the punctuation. Conceived in liberty and dedicated, and I'm going to put conceived and put a conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And if I just converted that, that's the way it would look. Now, instead of a big block of text, I can find things a little easier. To advance that a little further, I like to kind of indent some things. So I'm just going to press the space bar 4 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm going to copy that to the clipboard. So our fathers brought forth. Okay, how did they do that? This is where they did it. And this is what they did. And what about the nation? Well, it was conceived in liberty, and it was dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And I could see, here's where you might want to make this a little wider. I can see where maybe you'd want to, if you converted that right now, that's the way it would look. And one thing about this too is that in a big block of text, if you were looking for a certain portion of that text, you'd have to hunt through the block. And here you can use the structure to help you find things. A and N, that correspond to a new nation. Now I can see, getting back to this structure, and again, this is very subjective. Do it the way you want. I could kind of see how maybe that would be just as good. I don't know. If you converted that, it would look like that. So anyway, now when you're looking through this, it's a little easier to spot things. And one of the basic principles of memory is understanding. The more you understand something, the better you can, or more easily you can remember it, because it just makes sense and it clicks. That's as opposed to, say, just a random number. If somebody threw a random number at you, there's no meaning to it. So it's no understanding, and it's very hard to memorize. But something like this, the more you can make it mean something to you, the better off you are and the easier it is to memorize. This also helps you to kind of get the rhythm going. So like fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to. Sometimes I found that helps me. So the next tweak is to use symbols for whenever you can. Like, there's several places in here where the word and is used. And there's lots of places where a is used. I think it's 6 or 7 times, fourscore and 7 years ago. New nation and dedicated, all men are. Now a can stand for all of those things, but if you're just looking at it and you haven't got it nailed down yet, sometimes it's a little unclear. So if you can, like and, you can just convert that to an ampersand, fourscore and 7 years ago, dedicated, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition. So now, when you come out on those, you don't have to think, well, what a word is this? It's and. And similarly, for, you can convert that to just the number 4. Fourscore. And now that's 7, so you can convert that. Our fathers brought forth. And here, you could just use fourth. If it doesn't confuse you, there's no space between there like there are between the other initials. Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. So this is and dedicated to, you can convert that to a number. And dedicated to. So again, you see those symbols, you don't have to use up any brain power to figure it out. Now in a future video I'll show you how to use a text editor and a Freeplane mind map to generate those automatically. And again, you can just scroll the screen down and use this same thing as like we did before in as a flashcard application. Just move up and down and practice. And that's the thing about memory. Practice, practice, practice until you no longer need to look at these, and you can just scroll them out of sight, and now you're rehearsing the words themselves. At that point, when you've got that down, you've got it in long-term memory. But you still have to keep reviewing on a regular basis, maybe initially 2 or 3 times a week, and then after you feel you really got it down, then maybe once a week or a couple times a month. That's where a program like Anki comes in handy, because it's a flashcard application that works on spaced repetition. And the last tweak is using fonts. And sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it doesn't make much difference. If I go here and type in an uppercase I, lowercase l, and the number 1. And here I've zoomed in on it a little bit so you can see there's definitely some difference between the uppercase I, lowercase l, and the number 1. But when you go down here, ultimately you probably want to copy and paste these initials into some of their application. Then it might make a difference. So now I'm in the Freeplane mind map, and here's your uppercase I, lowercase l, and the number 1 in a serif font. In this case it's Georgia. But down here, this also is an uppercase I, this is a lowercase l, and that's the number 1. This is in a sans serif font, in this case Segoe UI. So the 1 and the 1 are no problem, but this lowercase l and this lowercase l, this uppercase I and this uppercase I, this is at a huge font. This is zoomed in really tight. But if this was down at a normal, something you'd normally read that size, it might be a little hard to tell between this uppercase I and this lowercase l. Now, and a serif font has these little decorations and stuff on the bottom, which make it a lot easier to use. And to go back to old school Courier, this is, again, it's easier to tell what those are. And I think back here in this Productivity 501 page, this might be some kind of a variation of Courier because it looks a lot like that, but you can tell the difference here. So in this application, you probably don't need to worry about fonts. But again, in some applications, if you're using a sans serif font, it might be better to switch to a serif font. So again, this tool is great by itself, but I found that if I can structure the text, it helps me understand it, which is easier to learn, and it also makes it easier to use in the program, because in the page here in the tool, because it's a little easier to find correlating parts between the full text and the initials. I've also found that using symbols makes it a lot easier on the brain. You don't have to use up a lot of brain power to figure out what those symbols are, so that saves you a little bit of work. And it doesn't take a lot of effort to do that. The other thing is fonts, and in this particular application it doesn't really make any difference, but in some applications it will. So when you copy the text here, it's going to be a little easier to see some of those look-alike characters. If they're in the wrong font, they show up better in the right font. That's a serif font. So that's all for this video. Again, check out this site, and in future videos we'll show you how to take this whole concept up a notch in Freeplane and text editors and other programs. So anyway, I hope you found this useful, and thanks for watching.